one more minute. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Temple Sinai of Cranston. My name is Rabbi Jeff Goldwasser. I'm the spiritual leader here at Temple Sinai. Today's Clergy Leaders Congressional Candidates Forum is sponsored by a group of faith leaders here in Rhode Island's 2nd Congressional District. I'll be introducing the members of the Interfaith Clergy Panel over the course of the program as they offer words of prayer and ask questions of the candidates. Right now, I would like to invite Reverend Timothy T. Rich, the rector of St. Luke's Episcopal Church in East Greenwich, to come up to offer our opening invocation.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. Let us be still and mindful and present. O God of many names and faces and stories, your stories invite us to be mutually encouraged by one another's faith. Help us this day to be encouragers and to leave so encouraged. Your stories challenge us to be agents for justice. Help us to rise to this challenge until your justice reigns. Your stories call us to be peacemakers. Help us to be faithful responders to this calling, that swords might be beaten into plowshares. Your stories remind us to be compassionate. Help us to remember the compassion you have for us and to share that compassion with others. Your stories suggest that you have given humanity dominion over all that you have created, over the fish in the sea, over the birds of the air. Help us to be faithful stewards of this gift. Your stories imagine a time when there might be no division in the body, but all parts have equal concern for each other. Help us to overcome our divisions and find our way to equal concerns. And your stories suggest that to aspire to office is a noble task, that those who so aspire must be sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome but considerate. Guide these candidates, that each day they might prove worthy of their aspirations, and bless them, that regardless of outcome, they might find rewards in their efforts. Amen.
We are very grateful to the candidates for Rhode Island's 2nd Congressional District who are participating in this morning's forum. They are seated before you in alphabetical order: Omar Bah, Joy Fox, Seth Magaziner, Sarah Morgenthau, and David Segal. We chose the candidates to invite to today's forum based on 3 criteria. 1, candidates who qualified to appear on the primary or general election ballot. 2, candidates who filed with the Federal Elections Commission. And 3, candidates who have raised at least $5,000 for their campaign. We wish to emphasize that this is a nonpartisan forum. The only Republican candidate who met our criteria, Alan Fung, was invited but has declined to attend. I want to take a moment to thank and welcome everyone who's watching this event online this morning. The forum is being recorded, and we will make sure that the recording is available later today. I'll also take this opportunity to thank Robert Sarinsky, who is our Zoom technician at the back of the sanctuary. The motivation for today's forum comes from a concern that elections in America today tend to focus on personalities and an attitude of, what can you do for me? As clergy leaders, we hope that this forum will help shift the focus even a little bit to more eternal and universal concerns about creating a society that lives up to the moral values of our highest aspirations. We are asking the candidates this morning to join our diverse and united faith communities in dreaming in league with God about a society that recognizes the dignity of each human being, that aspires to justice and righteousness, and a society that protects the creation that we have been given as a gift. Now, we recognize that this is a big agenda for a mere 90-minute forum. If after hearing the questions we're asking the candidates this morning, it seems to you that we've left out some important issues, please know that it seems that way to us too. The clergy members on our panel did a lot of work to research and prepare just 5 questions. The suggestions made by members of this audience were very helpful to us, but we had to make some tough choices to narrow down our questions to the time available. I'm going to remind the candidates of the format for today's forum. In a moment, each candidate will have just 2 minutes for an opening statement. The order of the candidates in that round and all of today's rounds were selected at random ahead of time. Following opening statements, we will have 5 rounds of questions with each candidate given 2 minutes to respond. The candidates were given the topic for the questions ahead of time, but not the actual questions. One question, actually, our third question, I believe, was selected from the questions suggested by audience members. Following our rounds of questions, we will have a final round in which each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. Throughout today's forum, candidates will be shown a yellow warning sign. Stephanie Haig is our warning, very good. When they have 15 seconds left, and a red sign when their time has expired. Thank you to Stephanie Haig of the Jewish Alliance of Greater Rhode Island for serving as our timekeeper. We've asked the candidates to direct their responses in all rounds to the clergy member asking the question and to the audience. Candidates may not direct comments or questions to other candidates. Unfortunately, we have no time for rebuttal or crosstalk among the candidates today. Finally, I do want to talk to you, our audience members, about your role in today's forum. We ask everyone to maintain decorum as befits this sacred house of worship. I know that this is not often the tone in American politics, but today we're going to be respectful and loving to each other. In the interest of making the best use of our limited time, please remain silent through the event. No speaking, no clapping, no cheering, no jeering. Okay, with all of that out of the way, we're finally going to hear from the candidates. Our first opening statement will be from Seth Magaziner.
Well, thank you very much, Rabbi Goldwasser, all of the members of the clergy for organizing this event, the other candidates participating, and all of you. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to have this conversation. I think the fact that we are here at an interfaith forum is very fitting because we are in Rhode Island, the birthplace of religious liberty in North America and in the Western Hemisphere. And it is in that context that my story begins. If it were not for Rhode Island, if it were not for the spirit of religious tolerance, I would not be here. I am the son of a Jewish father and a Catholic mother. And from that upbringing, I learned from a young age the important role that all of the various flavors of our faith communities play, and that we are privileged to live in a country and in a state that values religious freedom and where everyone is free to practice according to his or her own beliefs without interference. From that upbringing, I also learned from a young age what I believe to be an important doctrine in the Catholic faith of good works, that salvation comes not just from faith alone, but also from the work that we do here on earth. And God has given us an imperfect world and expects us to do our part to improve upon it, to make it fairer, to make it more just, to make it more sustainable. And that has been the lens through which I've approached my entire career, from being a public school teacher to working in the socially responsible investment field to working as state treasurer, working to try to level the playing field, end poverty, end homelessness, build a more sustainable and fair and just world. Because once again, we will be judged, I believe, ultimately by the work we do here on earth to carry out God's mission. Thank you.
Our next statement will be from Sarah Morgenthau.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to join you, my fellow candidates, and all of you. It was a pleasure on Friday to end Shabbat services here, and I'm really pleased to be back again. So I have the experience to represent this district, and I believe I draw the greatest contrast. Folks, we have never sent a Democratic woman to Congress, and I think it's time to have a woman's perspective in Washington. This is not just about the Dobbs decision. This is not just about Roe v. Wade being overturned, a right that we have had for 50 years. But it's a women's perspective. I look into the eyes of voters across the district, and in 10 seconds, know what we mean by women's perspective. I'm a mom. I have older parents who are no longer living. I've balanced work, family, all of those things, elder care, child care. We need to have this perspective in Washington, and it's time to send one. I also have a heck of a lot of experience. I have a lot of experience working in Washington. I served in 2 administrations. I worked in the Obama administration, helping to run the Peace Corps. I was the first woman to head up the private sector office at the Homeland Security. I worked on counterterrorism. I worked on cybersecurity. I worked on domestic terrorism. I worked on issues to keep our communities safe, something that we know too well today. Most recently, I was in the Biden administration heading up travel and tourism for the nation. This is about $7 billion coming into our economy. Public service runs deep through my family. My grandfather was Secretary of Treasury. He started the War Refugee Board, which saved hundreds of thousands of Jews. My mother was an immigrant to this country. She was gutsy. She ran for the seat herself in 1988. As your Congresswoman, I pledge to you, I will take my experience, I will take my perspective, and together, all of us, we will fight for our families, for our children, for our communities.
Thank you.
Yes, we can.
Our third candidate is David Segal.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for having me. It's good to be back on the bima. My campaign is fundamentally about pushing back against those interests that impede progress, that make it so difficult for us to achieve desperately needed things like broader health care, a fairer economy, meaningful or more substantial action on climate, to maintain, to defend, to expand access to basic rights. And what I've been saying throughout the campaign is that the best way of overcoming these impediments, corporate special interests, political corruption, is by building coalitions that are as broad as possible around common causes with moral weight behind them. And over the course of my time doing this work, and I ran for city council in Providence literally 20 years ago this summer, it's been tremendous to see that as part of those broad coalitions, there have been so many faith leaders and people of faith. And it's an interesting thing for me to have experienced because I grew up actually in a very religious milieu. I went to Jewish day school for nursery school through the end of middle school, and I'm very appreciative of much of what I was taught during that time, but it was not the sort of religious upbringing that was intertwined with a drive for social justice. And so my mind was expanded, my conception of faith was expanded as I got to meet people during fights for a living wage in Providence and for police reform that first got me involved in electoral politics, meeting people like Dwayne Clinker or Sister Ann working with the AFSC, moving on to the State House where we were holding meetings in churches like St. Teresa's in Olneyville in order to defend immigrants, individual immigrants who were going to be unjustly deported, and to push back against the Tea Party backlash that was driving policy at the State House. At the national level, I've been able to work on anti-war issues with groups like the Sisters of Mercy and to defend the rights of disproportionately impacted communities against things like government surveillance, so working with the Muslim community. And the fact that all of us are able to come together around these issues gives me faith that we're able to make progress despite the profound impediments that we face every day.
Thank you. Joy Fox.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today, and thank you for the leaders of our faith community for bringing us here together to discuss our shared values and commitment to each other. Reverend Rich, your opening prayer was extremely powerful and hit all the right notes for what we all need to do here, both as candidates and to make a stronger Rhode Island, so thank you. Like you, I care deeply about this state, and I've always been willing to roll up my sleeves and tackle tough challenges. I grew up in Cranston. I live in Warwick now, and I've traveled every inch of this district working for Congressman Langevin and Governor Gina Raimondo. And that is the difference here. I am in this race to represent the people of the 2nd District with a lifetime of lived experience. I didn't just move here, and I don't just summer here. I am deeply rooted in this community. It is my home. And it is that experience that I will bring a strong and unique understanding of the needs of the 2nd District and the challenges facing us to Congress. I hear every day that people just want things to work. And the bottom line here is if we want things to work, we need to change who we send to Washington. And that means more women. That means more Democratic women. And that means sending the first Democratic woman from Rhode Island to represent us in Congress. A woman that grew up here, that goes to church here. I grew up in both a Catholic faith and a Baptist faith. A woman that runs a small business here, and a woman that has a history of deep service here. I also know that we need to keep this seat blue, and we need to keep it in Democratic hands. I was on a team that beat Alan Fung twice, and I'm ready to do it again. I'm the only one up here that can say that. These are challenging times, and we need to help our struggling families afford housing, health care, and so much more. And in Congress, I will be your fighter and your advocate, and I look forward to a lively discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Omar Bah.
So much. My candidacy is that of making the impossible possible, that of humility and gratitude and wanting to give back. I came from a rural place in the Gambia, in West Africa, a place where there was nothing, no opportunities, no access to education or resources. And that took me to want to stand for injustice, to stand up to injustice. I wanted to first become a lawyer so that I would stand up to the dictatorship in that country, where people like women and people of different communities were being attacked and jailed and tortured. And that took me to become a journalist. And journalism in that country or in that part of the world is different from what we see here. It is a place where democracy is attacked. People are violently silenced. I was tortured and arrested on various occasions and eventually declared a wanted man. I fled that country in 2006, and one country gave me home, and that is the United States of America. I was brought here, heart of Rhode Island, just one day before my arrival, and it became home. And lo and behold, I found out that it is the home of somebody who was a refugee. It was founded by a former refugee. And that gave me the ties to Rhode Island. For 15 years, I've lived here in this district, in this state. It made me feel sense of home. And I'm running because I believe that this country, we are at a crossroads. Democracy is under attack. And I'm running to defend democracy by bringing my lived experience. I'm the only candidate who has seen democracy fall and who has seen the evils of dictatorship. And the culprit is the complacency that people often do not understand. So I want to defend democracy, and I want to defend the American dream that I attained here in this country. And by doing so, we are sustaining the future of our children and the freedom that we all enjoy in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Our first question will be asked by Reverend Scott Spencer, pastor of Woodridge Congregational Church in Cranston, United Church of Christ.
Can we just pause 1 second just to thank our friends at Temple Sinai and their wonderful Rabbi Goldwasser, for working so hard and sponsoring this event today. Thank you.
No applause, please.
Candidates, our faith, all of our faiths, inform our attitudes toward different issues and policy positions. So our first question for you, and I will repeat it, is how would you allow your faith to inform your policy positions while at the same time fairly representing the people who elected you? How would you allow your faith to inform your policy positions while at the same time fairly representing the people who elected you?
Our first candidate to respond to our first question is David Segal.
As I spoke to earlier, I grew up with a religious education, and I certainly identify as culturally Jewish, not somebody who practices every day. And I celebrate the holidays with my family and friends. I think that, among other things, the right to be somebody who is not actively practicing every day is an important thing that our society allows for. And much of the work I've done over the years is to maintain the rights of people to practice their religions, and to choose how and whether to practice religion in their private lives as they see fit. The problem, of course, follows when people try to impose their beliefs on others through public policy. And we see this happening increasingly, unfortunately, towards the end, in particular right now, of trying to take away people's basic rights. And we must always, of course, stand against that. I think there's an important role for people of faith and religious leaders to play in politics, and I spoke to some of it earlier over the course of my arc. Religious communities have been involved in essentially every important issue that we've been able to make progress on. And of course, over the broader arc of our history, we've seen religious communities play important roles and sometimes drive some of the movements that we're most proud of that have shaped our society, from abolition to suffrage to civil rights to anti-war movements to immigration to support for marriage equality. And I think that's incredibly important. And I think it's important because we need such broad coalitions to overcome the impediments to progress we often face. It's also incredibly important because there are people who don't believe in expanding rights, who want to wield the mantle of their faiths in opposition to doing so. And so elevating leaders who understand it to be part of their faith to expand rights, to respect the dignity and humanity and need for every single person in our communities to be able to flourish is incredibly important.
Thank you. Our second candidate, Omar Bah.
Well, two things. I think it is important. One of the first things that motivated me, that inspired me about American democracy, was the separation of church or clergy and state. Because I think it is important to have freedom of religion, freedom of association, but also for the state to operate without the influence or control of a specific clergy. I'm a Muslim, and I think that makes this table here very diverse, but also this audience. I bring that perspective to this conversation because I grew up in a place where it was a very free society. People have different faiths until a dictator took over and started forcing everybody to be a Muslim, which was not right. People were forced into exile. Christian public holidays were banned. Women were forced to dress in a certain way. So that is the experience and perspective that I'm bringing into this conversation. So coming to America, seeing that civil rights were led by people of clergy, Martin Luther King and others, that is something that I want to foster in this conversation, that faith can inform our goodness, can inform our policies, and it can inform the good work that we do. But it still has to be separate and stand outside the functions of government that we are doing. But we also have to respect the fact that people may not even be associated to certain states, to certain faiths. People can decide not to participate. This country is a free country where people do not associate with any religion, organized religion. People may be spiritual or not spiritual. Those are the things, that's the beauty of the democracy of this country, where we are not forced to perform or not perform, and we can belong anywhere and then still live in a free society and work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Sarah Morgenthau.
Thank you. I am a proud Jew, and faith guides me every day. I grew up in a family where faith was very important to us, and public service was part of who we were. We stood up for things and righted wrongs when it was hard, when it was difficult. My great-grandfather served President Wilson. He was on the ground in 1915 in Constantinople during the Armenian genocide. He stood up to the Turks in Constantinople. He stood up to Washington, and he said what was hard. I am proud that the United States and President Biden recognized 107 years later the Armenian genocide for what it is. My family has a history of doing that, of saying the things that are difficult, of speaking truth to power. And what I say to you is, this could not be more important today. As we look at the events of the January 6th hearing and the atrocities, the rise of domestic terrorism, of hate crimes, all of the difficult things that we are wrestling with, the urgency as we come out of this pandemic, we need to send leaders to Washington who will stand up, who will speak truth to power, who will make sure that for all of us, we get what we need for our children, for our grandchildren, for our communities right here. We are strong, we can do this, and I tell you, you have my word. I will leverage my experience, I will leverage my relationships, and bring great things back for all of us here. We can do this.
Candidate Seth Magaziner.
Yeah, so growing up in a multi-faith household, one of the things that I learned early on is that all of the major faiths have a few things in common. None of them have policy papers, but they do bring a common shared sense of values. And so to the original question from Reverend Spencer about how do we allow our faith to inform us in policy making, what I would say is it comes back to values, the value that every individual has inherent worth. No one of us is any better or worse than anyone else. And if you start with that as a principle, what that means is that everyone deserves a level playing field and economic opportunity. Everybody deserves to put their kids in high quality schools. Everyone deserves high quality health care. Another shared value that exists across all the major faiths is the importance of being a steward of this world that we inhabit and making sure that we leave it in better shape than we found it. That means combating the climate crisis. It means protecting our environment against those who would seek to exploit it. And it means that all of us deserve to live in a world of safety as well. That's why I believe that as an article of faith, we have to get serious about cracking down on gun violence. We have to make sure that the right to privacy is protected, because if one form of privacy is infringed upon, then that opens up the door to all forms of privacy being infringed upon, including the privacy to worship as you please. So I think that the answer is basically you can allow your faith to inform your policy making by allowing it to inform your values, and also recognizing the inherent worth and the inherent value in everybody else around us.
Candidate Joy Fox.
Thank you. We are all here because we're united by a shared set of values, that everyone deserves affordable housing, access to food security, and clean water and clean air. The list goes on from there. My faith informs my work, starting as a community newspaper reporter, serving in government, working at the Department of Corrections, and for Congressman Jim Langevin and Gina Raimondo, on how we can all come together to build a just and inclusive community for everyone. I root all of my work in humility, compassion, and empathy, and that starts with respect and listening and truly understanding where the other person is coming from. We all agree, as I said earlier, that people just want things to work. And my approach to policy making is in that vein of humility, compassion, and empathy. But it doesn't matter what your faith is or what our faith is, but we all agree that we need the same thing: access to affordable housing, access to a good quality education, safe communities, and a climate that is stable for all of us to live, work, and have fun here in Rhode Island, because that's what it is all about, our communities. So as a member of Congress, these are the values and principles that I will bring, that have been informed by being a part of this community my entire life and informed by my family. Again, I grew up in a Catholic and Protestant household and learned my service through my family, and have carried that on and will continue to do that as your representative in Congress. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank all of our candidates. You guys are doing great so far, okay? No one's going too far over time. I like that. Audience, you're doing a really great job too. We've gotten through our first question. Now we're on to our second. Our second question will be asked by the Reverend Linda Forsberg, pastor of First Evangelical Lutheran Church of East Greenwich.
Again, I want to thank Rabbi Glasswater and the members of Temple Sinai and all 5 of our candidates. I feel like we're in great hands no matter what happens. My question is on poverty and affordable housing. Many Rhode Islanders struggle with housing availability and affordability. As a pastor who serves both First Lutheran Church of East Greenwich, an affluent community, but also as a pastor who works with the Church Beyond the Walls, which ministers to people living in poverty and homelessness in Providence, I've seen the devastating effects of homelessness. In addition, a May 2022 survey showed that 91% of respondents here in Rhode Island said the cost of buying or renting a home in Rhode Island is a serious problem. In June, Governor McKee announced an $80 million investment in affordable housing. And so the question is, what would you do in Congress to address the housing shortage in Rhode Island, and particularly to support low-income and working families and individuals?
First on this question is candidate Omar Bah.
Well, thank you so much. My candidacy here is comes with a huge burden of people in the working class community. To a certain extent, we're middle-class families, but people of color, Black people in inner city communities who are struggling with homelessness, who are struggling with lack of access to opportunity and resources. I founded the Refugee Dream Center because of this. I got so much in this country. Within 13 years, I got a lot of education because of these opportunities that were given to me. I got 2 master's degrees and a doctorate, and I used that to counsel people suffering trauma that led them to homelessness, to a certain extent, or lack of opportunity to be able to get jobs that would sustain a living. And every day, through the work that I do at the Refugee Dream Center, I work on housing. People being homeless. You see, when you walk on Broad Street in Providence, for instance, you don't often see everything, the full picture of homelessness. People are bunking in people's homes. People are sleeping in couches. They cannot afford rent. They cannot afford mortgages. Or people are graduating college with student loans that are the amount of a mortgage. So those are the things that we are faced with, that we are tackling every day. The price of gas, it keeps going up and down, but it's still very expensive for a working class American. So I'm here to address homelessness. I want to go to Washington to fight, to bring more homes to people, to bring resources, to fight to ensure that there's health care for all, that people should not be struggling to access health care or to be struggling to be able to pay prescription drugs, and to ensure that people live in humble lives. And even when resources come, often people cannot have access, people cannot access resources. Sometimes if people get Section 8, I'm working currently with a client who cannot get a Section 8 apartment because the landlords are discriminating against them. And those are the things that we are working against.
Candidate Joy Fox.
Thank you. It is absolutely despicable that billionaires get to go to space and they get more coverage than people facing extreme poverty in our state. We need to do more. People need to be able to afford a roof over their head, to put food in their cupboards, and to have access to high quality healthcare and education. And these things cannot happen in a silo. They have to happen all together. As a member of Congress, there are things that we know that work, such as rental assistance and increasing access to first-time homebuyer programs and the like. I was with a young couple the other day who just moved into their first apartment together. They had looked at 40 to 50 apartments, and in order to secure the apartment that they had to pay 6 months' rent in advance. That is unacceptable and something that is very fixable in a state the size of ours. So when I think about solving this problem, it's just not a roof over their head. It's about making sure that they have access to everything that they need, from nutrition to healthcare to mental health services, to be able to attain, maintain, and retain the roof over their head, whether they're renting it or whether they're buying it. There's another whole half to these offices that rarely gets talked about, and that's constituent services. These offices should be out in the community more, talking to our community leaders. We know what works, and I've worked with these community leaders. I would know who to call to say, hey, we've got this idea in Washington, D.C. Does it work here? And hearing what they need on the ground here, the people that are on the front lines every day. We need to include those folks around the table as well as we work together to solve these challenges. Unfortunately, it's just not a housing crisis. It's so much more, and our size demands and makes it easy for us to be able to solve these problems. And I look forward to being that representative for you in Congress.
Candidate Seth Magaziner.
So the housing crisis in our state and in our country affects people at all stages of life. It affects young people who are looking at buying their first home or getting into their renting their first apartment. It affects seniors who maybe have to convert from or move from a 2-level house to a 1-level home because of mobility issues, and of course everywhere in between where people are having a hard time keeping up with the cost of living to begin with. I was meeting with seniors in Westerly last week, and hearing from them what I hear from so many people, which is that there are 2-year, 3-year, 4-year wait lists for seniors to get access to affordable housing that can accommodate their needs. The federal government and Congress can do more to make housing more available and affordable in Rhode Island, and we know that because there's a roadmap for how to do it. My grandparents all grew up poor. My grandfathers didn't have jobs that were very glamorous. One grandfather, Bob, was a steel worker in Worcester. My grandfather, Lewis, was a bookkeeper in New York. But with those jobs, which were not very glamorous jobs, they were able to buy homes because of the GI Bill, because they had served, and as a result, they were able to buy homes with federal mortgages with no down payments and low interest rates. And a whole generation of American families were able to achieve home ownership, build wealth, and enter the middle class because of the GI Bill. Importantly, many families, particularly in communities of color, were left out, which is one of the reasons why there is such a large racial wealth gap today. But the point is, a lot of those policies that worked then can work again now. Down payment assistance, subsidies on interest rates, expanding tax credits to make it easier to build more affordable housing, rental assistance for those who are housed but unstable. We know what the policies are. What it takes is leaders who will make it a top priority, and I will do that in Congress.
Thank you. Candidate David Segal.
Thank you. We have an affordability crisis for a number of reasons, and part of it relates to housing policy as such, and part of it's because we've made policy choices that immiserate millions of people across our country that don't relate to housing alone. And as I noted at the outset, the drive for economic justice is literally how I first came to get engaged in electoral politics as part of an effort to institute a living wage ordinance in Providence 20 years ago. And economic justice is, as some have spoken to, a racial justice issue. It's a gender justice issue. It's also a democracy issue. You can't have access to political rights without access to economic rights. The two must come in tandem, and we've seen the faith community recognize this. For instance, quite succinctly in the notion of the March on Washington for jobs and for freedom. So all of these things come in tandem. When it comes to affordable housing in particular, it's an issue I've worked on quite a bit over the years. I helped institute Providence's Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I oversaw the passage of legislation to incorporate the homeless into the hate crimes statute at the statewide level. I serve on the board of a nonprofit that particularly works to provide housing and other services to people who were recently incarcerated. So it's an issue that's dear to my heart. And at the national level, we need to deal with this in a variety of different ways. We need more very low-income housing. We need more public housing. We haven't invested in our public housing stock at the rate at which we need to in generations. We need to take other measures to ensure that people have access to the means that they need in order to survive. So we need to raise wages. We need to increase people's ability to join unions. We need fairer tax policy. We need to push back against the corporate monopolies and corporate special interests that are extracting from us as consumers and as workers and as small business owners. And we need a more progressive response to inflation. I'm worried that what the Fed is doing is reducing housing starts and is going to push our economy into a recession, which disproportionately impacts the people who are already on the margins who've just
Thank you.
recently found employment.
Candidate Sarah Morgenthau.
Thank you. It is morally wrong that any child, any adult should lie in poverty in this country. 1 in 6 families in Rhode Island struggles to put food on the table. We have the 10th highest rent in the country. Right here in Cranston, average rent is $1,600 a month. That is outrageous. Everything right now is too expensive, inflation is soaring, and we need to do something about it. I lie awake at night, and I know a lot of the moms and dads and others in this room, in our communities do too, because I worry that the middle class this winter is going to slip into poverty. They're not going to be able to heat their homes, they're not going to be able to get food on the table, and we need to do something about that. This winter could be really dreadful for a lot of people, and we need to pay attention to that, and we need to fight against that. We need to fight harder and harder for working people so that they can have a productive life, a meaningful life, a soft landing. Look, we need federal resources. These issues are not easy, but I pledge to you that I will go to Washington and I will fight. I will do whatever I can to bring back resources for folks here. We deserve this. We all deserve this, and we cannot allow this to happen. We have some amazing organizations right here in Rhode Island. We need to get the resources that they need to lift them up, because this is going to be a whole approach, right? It's not just the government, it's leveraging the public-private partnerships and the great work that's already being done right here in this state. We can do this, and I'll fight for us.
Thank you very much.
Our third question will be asked by the Reverend Betsy Aldridge Garland of Moosup Valley Congregational Christian Church, United Church of Christ.
I serve a church out in Foster where the town seal is 3 powder horns. And my congregation has guns. So I ask the question from this context. We are horrified by the way that gun violence is spreading across our nation, into our schools, neighborhoods, and beyond. The United States has the highest rate of gun homicides among all large, high-income nations. Do you support the federal assault weapons ban that the House of Representatives passed last month? And are there additional federal actions you support in response to gun violence? For example, federal background checks, funding for research on gun violence, and funding for intervention programs.
We'll start this question with candidate Seth Magaziner.
Thank you, Reverend Garland. Emphatically, yes. I am a new father. I have a 9-month-old son, Max, and I do not want him to grow up in a world where he has to worry about lockdown drills and school shootings. I want him to be able to just be a kid. And the epidemic of gun violence in this country must stop. That is why here as state treasurer in Rhode Island, I made Rhode Island just the 4th state in the country to stop investing in companies that manufacture assault weapons for civilian use. It's why I have advocated and testified every year for an assault weapons ban at the state level, because weapons of war do not belong on our streets. And it is why I will strongly advocate for an assault weapons ban at the federal level. We also need to do what we did in Rhode Island and pass a high-capacity magazine ban. We need to strengthen background checks, and we do need to research and treat gun violence like the public health epidemic that it is. Listen, the far right in this country, which do not represent most gun owners, by the way, they always want to distract and deflect and say, oh, well, it's because of video games, it's because of music, it's because of mental health, and we do have a real mental health problem in this country. But other countries have all of these issues too. They don't have mass shootings, and they don't have nearly the same rate of gun death that we do. The thing that makes us different is that we are the only developed country in the world that allows military-style weapons, weapons of war, to be bought by just about anyone at will with very few limitations. It has to stop. For the safety of our communities, for the safety of our children, it has to stop. I'm proud that our campaign has been endorsed by Brady, by Giffords, the organization started by Gabby Giffords, by the Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence, because I will fight strongly in Congress to pass common sense gun safety legislation.
Thank you. Candidate Sarah Morgenthau.
You know, too many parents have too many worries. We can't have them worrying about sending their children to school because guns are getting into our school. I'm the mother of 3 children. My daughter is actually sitting here today, and we can't be afraid. We have to feel that we can put our kids on the bus to school and that they're going to come home. We have to fight for our daughters, for our sons, for all of us. You referenced the Safer Communities Act, and I'm really pleased that Congress passed that. Again, the importance of why we need to keep this seat blue, and we need to send a Democrat to make sure that we are continuing to pass common sense gun safety issues. Look, I'm in favor of the Second Amendment, but I think we need to keep hands out of the hands of folks with mental health issues and with prior criminal records. And I do think that mental health has reared its ugly head in a way that is unimaginable throughout this pandemic. When I was at Homeland Security, we worked on security grants. I was just talking to somebody about it today before we started. I'm pleased that we've got $500 million in security grants, and we need to fight for those kinds of federal resources. So we need to support law enforcement, but we need to support our academic institutions, our mental health, our faith-based organizations, and provide them with grants so that they can become eyes and ears on the ground for our young folks that are getting radicalized and getting guns in their hands. I promise to you that I will go to Washington and fight like heck, and we'll bring back the resources that we need and get the legislation passed so that our communities are safe.
Thank you. Candidate Omar Bah.
Well, thank you so much. I think this issue of gun violence and gun safety is beyond just people's rights. It's just beyond the Second Amendment. It is about dissecting this from a racial perspective. As a young black male, I should not feel that I must carry a suit in my car every day when I drive around, because I'm thinking I may be misjudged by a police officer. And that does not mean I'm anti-police, but I think police need to be educated, not to misjudge every black male as a drug dealer or somebody who can feel you get out of your home and get shot. That is what we see on TV. Not every police officer is like that, so we need education, we need outreach, we need to build bridges between police and communities. I'm raising 2 black boys, 10 and 12. If everybody's afraid of potential gun violence, what do you think happens to black men within our communities about gun safety? So these are the very crucial issues that we must bring up. And it is also a macro issue and a micro issue. Within our communities, we see gun violence in inner city communities and among communities of color every day. And those are things that we must look at, the poverty issues, the issues of access to guns, and what can we do to stop this gun violence. And we can do preventative measures rather than punitive actions, where people can be put in prison where people can be just criminalized, they cannot get jobs, and eventually join gangs or engage in violence-related activities. And those are the things that we need to do, rather than empowering police or punishing communities of color. Build bridges and put them together. And we also need to ensure that we see the dynamics of this mental health issue. As a mental health provider, I understand that there is a huge problem of mental health when it's related to gun violence. But we cannot have, when it is a certain race, they are arrested and we say mental health. When it is another race, nobody mentions mental health. So I feel responsible for those people, for communities of color, for Black people, for people who often, when they are struggling, nobody mentions mental health. And those are the things that we need to address in this gun violence issue.
Candidate Joy Fox.
Thank you. Reverend, when you were asking your question, I think I counted 4 issue areas, so I have no problem saying yes, 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 and yes. You know, after the school shooting in Texas, my sister-in-law texted me and said, your nephew is going into kindergarten in the fall. We need to do something about this. I was also at a house party after that, and a hunter came up to me and said, don't take away my guns. It's not about taking away guns, it's about making our communities safer. And it's just not enough to talk about policy changes either. You know, we do a lot of talking, all of us, about these issues all the time, and it just felt like, gosh, there's got to be something more I can say here. So I called a former police chief and I called a public health expert, and they said there are 3 things. It's funny, there were 2 separate conversations, and they said the same 3 things. Community is number 1. It's looking out for one another. If you see something, say something. It's also about supporting organizations that are in our communities doing the work and understand who's coming into the Boys and Girls Club, who understands who's reaching out to the Nonviolence Institute. It also means looking at our community landscape and making sure our vacant lots are turned into places where the community can gather peacefully. Second, it's also data. It's why we wear seatbelts. It's because of data. We need more data to be able to make the case that this is about gun safety. And then lastly, it is about the policy. It is about an assault weapons ban. It is about background checks and raising the age. The other thing that I've learned through many conversations is, yes, mental health and housing, those are the 2 biggest issues that come up. Our problem in Rhode Island with guns is suicide. That is where our problem is with guns, and that is absolutely unacceptable. So as your representative, I look forward to working with the community and in Congress to solve this uniquely American problem once and for all.
Thank you. Candidate David Segal.
I think we see a lot of agreement on this issue amongst the several of us who at least came to debate today or speak today. I think we all understand the tragedy of the carnage of mass shootings and the day-by-day rhythm of violence in our communities, and as was just spoken to, suicide as well, and we need real action. It's heartening that there was some progress made this year for the first time in a real way, at least during my 20 years of engagement at the state level. And I think that's a function of work that a lot of us in this room have done to change the makeup of the assembly, and that folks have done to advocate specifically for those pieces of legislation. Unfortunately, it took a whole sequence of massacres, and most proximately Uvalde, to get there. I, of course, agree we need to close loopholes. We need to limit magazine capacity. We need to restore an assault weapons ban at the federal level. And we need to deal with the fact that years of, I'm going to say neglect, but active efforts to ensure that we don't address these issues mean that there are already hundreds of millions of guns out there, and we're going to be contending with the consequence of that for decades to come. And so we need to do more around storage, around suicide prevention, around violence interruption, ensure that there are more entities like the Nonviolence Institute and that they're better funded. And we also need to look for ways to sew our society back together. We have extraordinarily low social trust in this country, incredibly high polarization, increasing radicalization, and we need to figure out ways to address all of those concerns.
Thank you. All right, everyone, we're doing great. Time for a little 7th inning stretch. Relax, stretch out. We're doing great. Our fourth question, suggested to us by an audience member, will be asked by Cantor Dr. Deborah Johnson of our host congregation, Temple Sinai of Cranston, affiliated with the Union for Reform Judaism.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you for the work you do, and thank you for the work you're pledging to do. On June 24th, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, the landmark ruling that established the constitutional right to abortion. A recent Pew survey reported that while there are indeed people of faith on both sides of this issue, 66% of Black Protestants, 60% of white Protestants who are not evangelical, 56% of Catholics, 55% of Muslims, and 83% of Jews favor legal access to abortion. Several of you have raised this issue. We would like you now to address it as specifically as you're able. Would you vote in favor of banning some or all abortions nationwide? Or do you believe that the protections of Roe should be codified into federal law? In whatever case, what specific steps would you take?
We'll begin with candidate Sarah Morgenthau.
Thank you, Cantor. I'm the mother of 3 children, and here we are in 2022, and it's unfathomable that our daughters have less rights today than we did 50 years ago. The Republicans are intent on instituting a national abortion ban. They have voted to ban access to contraception as a guaranteed right. That is unfathomable. We are here fighting again for this. Yes, I would support having abortion be codified at the federal level. But if I were to tell you that that's going to be easy, I'd be lying. And one of the things I want everyone to know is that I will fight like heck to make sure that we get what we need. I said earlier, we've never sent a Democratic woman to Washington. It's time. We need that perspective. We only have 27% right now of women in Congress. We need more of that because these issues are important. We need that perspective at the table when we're passing legislation. Yes, I will fight. Yes, I will use all of my experience working across 2 administrations and my relationships and my perspective on this, right? Balancing children, family, older parents, healthcare. You know, the fact that we don't have paid family medical leave. We are one of 2 countries in the world that doesn't have that. These are things that we need, and I will fight like heck for us.
Thank you. Candidate David Segal.
Thank you for the question. And this just immediately gets at the intersection of 2 points that others and I have raised already. The Supreme Court that we have right now is a function of an explicit bargain between people who wield their faith to strip away people's rights and corporatists who want to ensure that there's no regulation of corporations. That's how we ended up with the people we have now serving as a majority of this court. And it's part of why pushing back against corporate special interests and political corruption is part of the effort to secure abortion rights and retain access to other basic rights. I, over the course of my time in the Assembly, am proud to have been a co-sponsor of Roe codification. This is during the dark ages of the mid-aughts when things are imperfect today, but they were even worse back then. And we had clear anti-choice majorities in the House and Senate, and Don Kacheri was our governor. We were having to fend off the possibility of a waiting period. Making it to the floor would have become law very quickly had it been allowed to see votes. I worked to expand or co-sponsored legislation to expand access to abortion coverage to people who are on Medicaid. And I've also done work to help push back against the Supreme Court, organizing hundreds of thousands of people to oppose the nominations of Coney Barrett and Kavanaugh, for instance, and also doing a lot of work that, too detailed for here, around Senate procedure to look for ways that we could delay and perhaps even block their confirmations. I think that we need to, in some approximate order of structural impact, we're in the middle of a crisis and we don't know what this court's going to do next. So we need to do things like grab the lowest hanging fruit. We need to push forward with codification of contraception rights, for instance. It seems like that might be possible even under the current Congress. We need the executive branch to take action to allow access to abortions in places where it's banned or likely to be banned. We need to codify Roe, and then we need to look for ways to reform the court so we end up with one that is not intent on stripping away basic rights and instead is willing to affirm them.
Candidate Joy Fox.
Thank you. I support abortion rights, and given recent actions of the Supreme Court, I support codifying Roe v. Wade, and it will be up to Congress to do that. State-by-state laws here are disastrous. It shouldn't matter how much money you have or where you live as to whether or not you can access the health care you deserve, especially the health care as a woman. This is a healthcare issue for a woman to decide between she and her doctor, and it is a matter of privacy. Let's not forget, privacy is also under attack here, not just a woman's right to choose. I talk often to my friends who are OBGYNs, and when this news came down, they were absolutely devastated, and then in this next breath said, but we will work harder and we will fix this. They are concerned about being able to provide the care that they are trained to do for women, and they are even more concerned for their friends in Ohio, in Indiana, and the list goes on. This is unacceptable. And I'll tell you, Rhode Island can't count on Alan Fung on this issue, and women can't count on him, but you can count on me to be there on the front lines every day, working hard to protect a woman's right to choose, because this is a matter of health care and our economic freedom as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Omar Bah.
Well, it's about human rights for me. I come from a perspective where women were seeking health access or reproductive rights, and they and their doctors were imprisoned and tortured, and some even fled into exile. And that is the perspective that I bring in. You see, you cannot have human rights without reproductive rights. You cannot have reproductive rights without democracy. You lose one, you lose the other. So America, we cannot get started with criminalizing a certain group of people because of how they want to live their lives. Certainly not women, half or probably more than half of our population, trying to criminalize them. Where is it going to? Probably next is same-sex marriages or interracial marriages. It is a slippery slope. So I bring that lived experience to fight for democracy, fight to defend human rights and reproductive rights. It is also an issue of healthcare. My wife survived breast cancer. By the time she was diagnosed, it was stage 3. It was almost stage 4 when she would have been terminal. And that was because we could not access healthcare. That is very important for me as a black woman who is my wife. And how many people of color or how many women in general are going through this? So it is economics, it is human rights, and it is about access. We cannot criminalize access. Actually, we should put more money into people's pockets so that they can access healthcare. I believe healthcare for all, especially people who are struggling to afford it. And prescription drugs are suddenly difficult to access. These are the things that we should be talking about as a country and as a community rather than criminalizing people. And these are the things that we believe that people are struggling with. So we should codify reproductive rights from a federal level, but also create more avenues to put more money out there for healthcare access for all.
Thank you. Candidate Seth Magaziner.
Yeah, so abortion is a difficult and deeply personal issue where there are many people of faith who have differing opinions. And it is precisely because of that those decisions should be made by women and not by politicians. When I talk to people around Rhode Island, I hear a range of different views on abortion, different levels of comfort, different levels of different types of opinions on it. But almost universally, nobody believes that these decisions should be made by politicians in Washington. They should be left up to women. And that's what I'm going to fight for. It's what I'm going to continue to fight for. And you guys are absolutely right. People are afraid about this Dobbs ruling and the slippery slope and how far it's going to go. I mentioned my son Max earlier. He was born through IVF. And under some of the restrictive laws that are being proposed in states around the country, that procedure would be banned. My son, who I love more than anything in the world, would not be here if some of these far-right politicians had their way. So it is because of this that as state treasurer, I strongly and vocally supported codifying the protections of Roe v. Wade at the state level, and strongly and vocally support legislation to make sure that all women have access to reproductive health care regardless of what type of insurance they have. And it's why at the federal level, I will fight just as hard to codify the protections of Roe v. Wade into federal law, because this choice should be made by women and not by politicians. And yeah, look, it's true. We're not supposed to be talking about other candidates, and I do think an exception needs to be made here, that the reason that the Republican in the race is not here today, we learned yesterday, is because he's in Wyoming fundraising with Kevin McCarthy, the House Republican leader, who has said that he supports passing a national abortion ban. So we know what the agenda on the right is, and that is what is at stake in this election.
Thank you. Our fifth and final question before our closing statements will be asked by the Reverend Timothy T. Rich, rector of St. Luke's Episcopal Church in East Greenwich.
Again, thank you all so much for your time and for your work. You've perhaps noticed that each question is preceded by a bit of a preamble, and so I will read the entirety of what we've prepared, preamble and question, and then circle back around with the question, just in case it gets lost in it all. As religious leaders, we are steeped in the sacred story of creation found in the Bible, and we recognize our responsibility to care for the environment. While we are encouraged by the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 in the House and the Senate, with many provisions that will help protect American air and water from pollution and climate change, we wonder what the next steps will be. What will be your environmental priorities as a member of Congress, and how will you ensure those priorities are achieved? So again, what will be your environmental priorities as members of Congress, and how will you ensure those priorities are achieved?
And we'll begin our final question with David Segal.
Thank you for the question. I think the Inflation Reduction Act speaks to a lot of what can be good about our system and what can be bad about our system, some of which I've already reflected upon over the course of the morning. The reason that we were able to achieve hundreds of billions of dollars in incentives and credits around renewable generation and EVs and efficiency is because of the organizing of tens of millions of people over the course of decades, and that's an extraordinary thing. And also the reason why it is insufficient is because of the influence of corporate special interests and corruption that made a point of blunting the bill and adding language that's likely to increase fossil fuel consumption, and delayed its passage for 18 months while making it much narrower than otherwise would have been. So we still need to spend hundreds of billions of dollars over the course of coming years on climate change measures if we're going to meet the Biden administration's goal of a 50% reduction relative to 2005 emissions, let alone the Paris or Green New Deal goal of net zero by 2050. And I support that. And we need to invest a lot more in transmission and in production and in batteries and in energy efficiency and in public transit. We need to make a point of remedying racial injustices as we do so, and I support measures like a Green New Deal for public schools, which is a piece of legislation, Green New Deal for public housing, Green New Deal for cities that would do that. Over the course of my time in office, I helped make Providence, I think, the first capital city in the country to have a renewable energy standard. I oversaw passage of legislation to enable many of the wind turbines and solar panels we have up across the state today. This has been an impulse of mine since the beginning of my time in politics, and groups like Friends of the Earth, Bill McKibben, who created 350.org, are backing my candidacy because they recognize that work.
Candidate Joy Fox.
Thank you. I guess I would break down my priorities into 4 areas. 1, making sure our quality of place is preserved. We all love summering here in Rhode Island, and the seasons are tremendous, and we need to do more to make sure to protect that. And the anchor to that is Narragansett Bay and all the tributaries and streams that flow into that. Second, we need to make sure that we come together on how we transition to a cleaner energy economy in a fair and just way, and making sure that our workforce is prepared for that. We need to lean into innovation even more than we are now. It's just not enough to have the first offshore wind farm. We need to keep going and make sure that we're developing our blue economy. And we need to make sure that for the climate change that is already too late to fix, that we are more resilient as a state, not only our economy and our health, but for our health and for our communities. This is the greatest challenge we face, and we need to attack it with extreme urgency. Again, it is about our health, our economy, and being able to stay in the place that we all love the most. These are the things that I will fight for as your next member of Congress.
Thank you very much. Candidate Omar Bah.
Well, I think the issue of the environment is about poverty, is about access, is about where people live. As somebody who works in south of Providence and the west end of that city, I see the highest levels of asthma every day. And my younger son is a victim of this, because these are areas that are more highly industrialized, and they suffer the most from the emitting of fossil fuels in these neighborhoods. And the kids in these neighborhoods have the highest level of asthma across the state. And I've gotten grants from the EPA, and we visit thousands of homes to ensure that we fight to ensure landlords place better lead remediation in these apartments, because often people are getting poisoned. Kids of color or refugee kids or immigrant kids are getting lead poisoned and nobody notices. I've put policies in place to ensure that landlords cooperate and comply with these rules and codes. And I think it's a macro level. Our coastal coast is under threat, but the coast of America or Rhode Island is not exclusive to the rest of the environmental issues that are affected by climate change across the globe. And as an immigrant and a refugee, I think these are all intertwined. We have refugees within this country, people moving from South Providence because of gentrification, because of environmental issues, to Alabama, to Tennessee, because of gentrification, because of not lacking access. And if we do not address the climate issue, the Paris Accord and the global warming issues, there will be a massive immigration in this world that the industrialized world has never seen. Because if there is flooding or drought in Africa or Latin America, people will come to this country. So I think this issue of climate change and the environment should be tied to immigration policy, and it should be tied to our foreign policy in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Seth Magaziner.
Well, we are the ocean state in Rhode Island, and so a clean environment is absolutely crucial to our economy and our way of life. There's a range of issues that I would focus on. We need to improve water quality. That means addressing PFAS and forever chemicals that poison our water supply, ocean plastics, which do the same. But clearly the biggest and most existential threat that we face is climate change. And already over the last 30 years, the Narragansett Bay has risen 6 inches. This is a clear and immediate threat that affects all of Rhode Island, and particularly frontline communities. So as state treasurer, one of the first bills that I worked on created clean energy programs at the State Infrastructure Bank. We actually have a state-level green bank in Rhode Island now that I helped to start. Through that program, the town of Westerly has gone West Warwick has gone completely renewable. The town of West Warwick has not paid an electric bill on its town buildings in 5 years because of wind and solar projects that we helped them develop. Westerly is getting funding to do climate resiliency work to protect against sea level rise. The Infrastructure Bank is getting ready. We're getting ready to do a major push on replacing lead pipes and lead service lines all across Rhode Island. So I've done work in this area that's made a real difference. And I think the next representative of District 2 is going to play a crucial role in combating the climate crisis nationally and globally. It's a real point of pride that the 2nd Congressional District is the birthplace of the offshore wind industry in North America. Not only is that important in reaching our clean energy goals and becoming 100% renewable, it's also important in telling the story of how clean energy can be more affordable than conventional sources of energy. The latest procurement of offshore wind here in Rhode Island was below the market rate for electricity. So we can make energy more affordable, make it cleaner, take power away from the Vladimir Putins of the world who control our energy supply now all at once by making strong investments in clean energy. That's something I prioritized as treasurer and will continue to advocate for in Congress.
Thank you. Sarah Morgenthau.
Thank you. Look, I understand that climate change is one of our biggest threats. It's one of our biggest public health threats. It's a threat to our national security. It's a threat to our economic viability. Rhode Island has been a leader in fighting climate change and in providing good and clean new jobs. We can invest in our blue and our green economies, and we will continue to do that. We have 400 miles of shorelines to protect. We have rising sea levels to contest with. The seriousness of this issue cannot be forgotten. And the Inflation Reduction Act, the biggest climate bill that Congress just passed and the President just signed, was a great first step. But folks, you know, Alan Fung put out a press release saying that he was against the Inflation Reduction Act. We cannot afford to lose this seat to Alan Fung. We cannot afford to get our eyes off of the Republicans who are saying climate change is a hoax. So again, it's been a priority of mine. It's why when I worked on the new National Travel and Tourism Strategy, when I was heading up travel and tourism in the Commerce Department, we put climate change as one of our priorities. It was a new thing that we did that we hadn't done several years ago. I think it's exciting, actually, that we are now focused on one of the biggest threats and that there really is a national, a global interest in fighting climate change. I will make it a priority. We need to make it a priority. We cannot allow this not to be. We have to remember the urgency of what we're dealing with. And I will fight like heck to get resources for us in Washington.
Thank you very much, and I apologize for the interruption. Finally, we will move on to closing statements. Each candidate will now have 2 minutes, and we'll start with candidate Joy Fox.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us here today, and thank you for everyone who's been watching on Zoom. I hope you're all still awake at home as well. Everyone here looks very lively. You're right, we didn't cover so much today, and we could be here for hours. But again, I will say there is a difference here. I am running to represent Rhode Island's 2nd Congressional District because of my lifetime of experiences here to be able to represent you in Washington, D.C. I'm running for many people, including my mom, who is my dad's caregiver as he struggles with Alzheimer's. I'm running for my sister Molly, who is a physician assistant and worked through the pandemic, but still has mountains of student loan debt. I'm working for and running for my brother Tim, who is a Navy veteran, and all veterans like him who need access to the health care they deserve and to the workforce development opportunities that they also deserve. The bottom line, again, is people want things to work, and if you want things to work in Washington, you need to change who you send there. It is time to send the first Democratic woman to Congress from Rhode Island, someone that is from the community and that will fight for you on day one. It is no secret that people are struggling right now. We've talked about it all morning. There is more that we can do, and I bring a unique and strong understanding of this district and the challenges we all face to be able to fight for everyone here on day one. If you like what you heard today from me, I ask you to join us. This is a campaign after all, and we're in the final weeks. September 13th is the primary, and I ask for your vote on September 13th. And please help us spread the word. Thank you again for having us, and we'll see you all out on the trail.
Thank you. Candidate Seth Magaziner.
Well, thank you all very much. This is one of the most important federal elections that Rhode Island has had in the last century. There is so much at stake. Access to health care, restoring pathways to the American dream so that everyone has a chance to build a stable middle-class life for themselves and a better life for their kids. Protecting access to reproductive choice, protecting the right to privacy, turning back and reversing climate change, combating gun violence, and building a more sustainable future for our children and their children, and so on. I have spent the last 8 years serving the 2nd Congressional District as State Treasurer, working in every community across the state with people to solve problems. From Burrillville, advocating with the nurses and patients' families and care providers to keep the Zambrano Hospital open, to Westerly, where we've helped the community become more climate resilient, to Cranston and Johnston, where we're building new elementary schools. I know the issues of the 2nd Congressional District communities because I've spent the last 8 years working with every community with people to solve problems. We're facing challenging times in this country, times of division and polarization, times when it feels like our politicians in Washington are pulling us backwards. My message to all of you is don't lose hope. As they say, it is darkest before the dawn, and I do believe that a bright future awaits us if we come together, organize, mobilize, and stand up for Rhode Island values. All of you, the faith communities of Rhode Island, have an absolutely vital role to play in this election by reminding people what is at stake, by reminding people that we need to lead with values and we need to elect leaders that reflect Rhode Island values. I have said from the beginning, this campaign is not about me. It is about all of us, our shared values, and ensuring that there's a brighter future for all of our children. I invite you all to join us on that journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Candidate David Segal.
Thank you all thank you for hosting. Thank you for coming. I think that those of us on the stage seem to agree on a lot. There might be some differences in points of emphasis, but a lot of agreement. And despite efforts by the powers that be to divide us across the country, most people across this country agree with most of us when it comes to most of the things that we've talked about today. And so the question we need to ask is, why doesn't anything seem to change? Or why is what progress we do make always insufficient? Or why are we having to defend against backsliding on such important issues? And the answer, as I said at the start, is the influence of corporate special interests and political corruption through a variety of different vectors that plague our system. And since my very first run for office 20 years ago, when I ran against an entrenched board machine that was opposing living wages in Providence, through my time in the Assembly when I pushed back against the banks or worked to make our tax system more progressive by restoring the capital gains tax, to my time working as a federal advocate, for instance, to help revive the anti-monopoly movement to protect consumers and small businesses and workers against outside-sized power wielded by corporations, I have demonstrated a willingness to push back against those structures that are the fundamental impediments to progress. And it's why I'm not taking corporate PAC money in this race, and why I'm not taking money from registered corporate lobbyists. And it's why I am endorsed by Senator Elizabeth Warren, whom I've worked with on pushing back against revolving door corruption at the federal level. And if we're going to change the outcomes in DC, we need people of that impulse who are willing to go at the structures that are making things the way they are. And that's been my impulse throughout my time in and out of office. And it's the focus of this campaign, and it's why I hope to have your support on Election Day.
Thank you. Candidate Sarah Morgenthau.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thanks to all of you for coming. Thanks to everybody who's on a Zoom watching us patiently. I think and I hope that I've conveyed in this short time that we've had that I really care about these issues, that I will really fight for these issues, that we are all important, and that these are really difficult times. You have my commitment that I will fight for all of us to bring back great things. Like so many of you in this room and on the Zoom and out there that I meet across the district, faith guides me. Faith guides me throughout everything that I do. And I also believe that when you have an opportunity to serve, you need to seize that opportunity. You need to grab it, and you need to go out and do great things. And I think together that we can do that. You know I have the experience. I've worked in Washington for 2 administrations. I worked for Obama. I worked for Biden. I have those experience working on issues that are important for all of us. I'm a mother of 3 children. I have parents that are no longer living. I juggled all of that. We have that fresh perspective. But you know what, folks? We have an opportunity, a really unique opportunity, to send the first Democratic woman to Washington from Rhode Island. Come on, folks. We gotta do this. If there was ever a time, it's 2022, we've gotta do it. Thank you. Thanks for being patient, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank you. And we'll give the final word today to candidate Omar Bah.
Well, thank you. I will respond to that by saying it's an opportunity to send the first black person to Washington. But beyond that, on a serious note, I think, thank you. But I think on a serious note, our democracy is under attack. After January 6th, and after as somebody who lived under tyranny and a torture survivor who stood up to injustice, I said to myself it was time to stand up and protect this democracy. Because after this, as somebody who fled from one country, where else am I going to? That is it for me. So I needed to stand up and protect democracy and stand up to injustice from those who seek to destroy this democracy, the longest enduring democracy in this world. So I said it was time to have a voice, to not be a spectator on issues that matter in our lives. We cannot just be having representation from a certain group of people, the politically connected or the elite, or people who've made a career out of politics. The people, we the people, can also be represented, can also have a voice, can also speak for ourselves. And that is what motivated me to become a candidate in this election. And certainly it is a referendum between the grassroots and the people who are from the establishment. I did not expect to have millions in this election or in this campaign. I knew that I had the audacity and I had the hope in the people in this district and Americans across the state to ensure that I tread through this journey. And that is why I'm in this election, to protect democracy. And we cannot have democracy without having the American dream. An American dream is about social justice, it's about housing, it's about healthcare for all, it's about the minimum wage, where people are struggling to access a living wage so that they can take care of their families. And certainly it is about the future. We can have a future where young boys of color are not afraid to be shot in the streets, where women are not marginalized or criminalized. And certainly a future where American children can say, if a kid from rural Africa can come and do this, I can do even better. And that is why I'm in this race. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the clergy leaders and faith communities that have come together today to sponsor this forum, I want to thank all of our candidates. Go ahead. I really want to commend you all on your very thoughtful reflections with us today of making this a race that's about ideas, the issues, and I commend you all for doing that today. Thank you so much. To close our forum today, I'd like to ask the Reverend Betsy Aldrich Garland of Moosup Valley Congregational Church to lead us in a benediction to close our program.
I offer as a benediction a prayer written by Richard Gilbert, who's minister emeritus of the First Unitarian Church in Rochester, New York. Blessed are the just, for they shall have their reward in indestructible integrity. Blessed are they who labor in the vineyards of the public realm, for they shall be remembered. Blessed are they who love their nation enough to praise its strengths and criticize its weaknesses, for they shall be made wise. Blessed are public officials who are responsive to the needs of these, the least of the people, for they shall be deputies of the community. Blessed are they who serve the public good, for their reward is in being used. Blessed are the powerful who acknowledge their power as both gift and responsibility, for they know the binding obligations of their bounty. Blessed are they who rebuke narrow self-interest to sustain the commonweal, for they are the patriots the nation needs. Blessed are they who rise above partisan loyalties, for they shall administer a public trust. Blessed are all people who seek justice in an imperfect world, for they shall be welcomed into the beloved community. Amen.
We couldn't have had a great forum today without a great audience. I want to thank everyone who's come here, both live in person and those who are watching on Zoom. Of course, I'm going to invite the candidates to stay as long as they'd like to talk with people who are here today. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.